Welcome back to another segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. If you are enjoying these segments, please do hit like and subscribe. I recently had the opportunity to catch up a bit with Scott Hamner, who is Earl Hamner's son. And we had some issues with the video and audio, so I wanted to share with you a lot of what we talked about, and I'm hoping that I can actually get with Scott again soon and let him, in his own words, share some of this. Now, because I sort of am not able to use the actual video and audio with Scott, I had another idea. As you listen to this recap, jot down some notes, jot down some questions, and what I will do is I will see if Scott would be willing to come back on with me and answer some of your specific questions. So after you've listened to the various different things we covered, I'll see about taking up some of your questions that you have for Scott. So please do put questions for Scott into the comments below. But in the meantime, Scott and I talked about our original time in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and filming The Homecoming. And he shared that that was actually based on a true story, and a story that that Earl used to share every year with him and the family, his sister Caroline and his wife Jane, Earl's wife Jane, and that it really did happen. Earl's father had come home one Christmas Eve, and that he had thrown rocks or snowballs or something onto the roof, which woke up all the children. They all ran downstairs, and their father came in and told this story about having seen this little man up on the roof and how he had thrown rocks at him, and that he called him an SOB, and well, not in those terms, but actually, I guess called him that, and said that this little old SOB was up on the roof, and that when he threw rocks at him, he dropped this bag, and which was the gifts that he brought in. So he said that Earl said that his father would share this story, and Earl would then share it with his family every Christmas, and they would all laugh. And so it was really a wonderful background to The Homecoming. And then Scott was around. I didn't realize that when we were filming on the studio, on the soundstage at CBS for all the interiors, and Scott talked about when we were filming the scene cracking the walnuts, that Scott was actually up in the rigging, high up above, and watching the filming from up there. I didn't know he was up there, but I did know that he and the family came to Jackson Hole and spent that week with us up there when we were filming. And of course, he and Caroline were in the scene when the missionary lady is outside of Ike's store, and they were part of that scene there. And around the motel where we stayed, and we built snow people and had snowball fights and went into town. So we just reminisced about what a wonderful experience that was for all of us, and with Edgar Bergen putting on the little show for all of the children in the motel sort of lobby area with Charlie McCarthy and Mortimer Sneed, and how special that was for all of us. So he also has very fond memories of our initial time in Jackson Hole. We also talked about, Scott had written 3 episodes of The Waltons, and that were all in the final season 9, including our final episode, The Revel. And I asked him if he knew, or if there were any rumors about that potentially being the last episode of the series, because we didn't know that when we filmed it. But he said he did indeed know that was going to be the final episode. So clearly it was known, but it was not shared certainly not with me as a cast person. And I, whether any of the adults knew, but at that point there really weren't any adults left around. So maybe they thought it would somehow be different if we knew, or they didn't want us to be upset, or they just weren't ready to share that news, but we did not know. So that was interesting to hear. But he said they did know that although it was going to be the end of the series, it was not going to be the end of the Waltons altogether, that there was already plans in the works to do the 3 reunion movies that we indeed did do the year after the series ended, those first 3 reunion movies. So he knew that although it was the end of the series, it was not the end of the show. So that was good. Now, we did not know about the potential for those 3 TV movies until later either. So we just weren't always in the loop, which is interesting. He said that he'd always been interested in writing, and that his father, he used to go to Earl's office with him, because Earl went to the office every day and wrote, and that Scott would often go with him, and how much he was influenced by what a wonderful writer his father was. He had wonderful things to say about him and the work, and how much he learned from Earl, and also then working with all of the writers on the Waltons and being around them, Rod Peterson and Claire Whitaker, who were writers and then also producers, story editors, and Nigel and Carol McKeon, who were producers and writers. And one of the things that when I was talking with Michael O'Keefe, and he mentioned about the writer's room, and I said, I didn't think the Waltons had a writer's room in the traditional sense. And Scott said they did indeed have a writer's room. He said it was more of like one of their offices, but because we did have a staff of producers who were also writers, that they would gather together and go over storylines and things like that, and that writers would come in, and Scott said this is how it came about for him. You could pitch a storyline, or it might be that they had worked out what storylines and things were that they wanted, and that then you might be given a storyline, and that there would be a discussion about what the story was or was going to be, and then as a writer you would write an outline, and then you would write a first draft, and then like a final draft, and that at that point it would be turned over to sort of the staff writers, and then how much they rewrote it from there would depend on, I guess, how close the final draft that the writer turned in, how close that was to what they felt the final story needed to be, and how well the writer had voiced the characters. He also shared about, with continuity, that there was somebody who might have like a really good memory about what had happened with characters over the seasons, so that storylines weren't like repeated. I think he was also talking about it in relation to various different shows that he worked with over the years. After the Waltons, he went on to work on other shows. He worked on Dynasty, he worked on Falcon Crest, he worked on Knots Landing. He then moved into the daytime world and wrote for As the World Turns and Port Charles and The Young and the Restless, and spent a lot of years, a similar type of thing, where if a character, he used an example of if a character had their tonsils out, and then a few seasons later a writer pitches someone having their tonsils out, that of course there would be that person who said, oh no, we can't do tonsils, but maybe they could break an arm or something. So they did their best with those sort of continuity questions. These aspects were factors in the writing, but it was interesting to me. And Scott talked about that with the Waltons and said that actually Earl chose to take a lower salary in return for retaining more creative control of the show, which I think was great for all of us, and much appreciated that he was willing to do that, because that did make, I think, a huge difference in the quality and consistency of the show. And Scott said that Earl did make the final pass on every script. And then he said how much of any given script was rewritten from what the writer turned into the final version would vary greatly sometimes. Scott also shared that, he has retained a really close relationship with the Hamner family, that he had opportunities when he was young to go and back there and meet the family and spend time there. And he said, I asked him about how much was real in the stories, because I know you often ask me about things like that, how much was true. And he said that a lot of it was based in actual circumstances or people, but that his father had a really great imagination and loved to embellish and build upon concepts. So that was also interesting information to hear, that not all of it was fictional, but certainly a fair bit was, and certainly it was embellished or rewritten or built upon in order to tell the best possible story for the episode. He did say, as I have mentioned, that like the Baldwin sisters were based upon an actual mother and daughter, but he said that they were sort of from the wrong side of the tracks in Schuyler, and so not living in a big mansion. But he said that sometimes with his Earl, with his father, would go and they'd go by and they'd visit and get some whiskey from these two women. And, he said often go by Ike's store, or it wasn't Ike. And he mentioned who the character was, who the actual person was, and said he was quite a character. But that Earl was always told by his father not to share this information with mother, or Scott with grandmother, because that would have been frowned upon. She would not have approved. So that aspect of the character of Olivia, and also of Grandma, was very accurate. But he said, Scott said that he has continued to stay very close with his aunts and uncles and Hamner cousins, and that it is a very tight family, and that he really continues to embrace those relationships and be in touch with them. So that was very nice to hear. And I got the sense from him that his own, although his family was small, it was his father and mother and Scott and his sister Caroline, that, they had quite a lovely childhood. I asked if they watched the Waltons every week, and he said yes, that on Thursday nights they would all watch together until Scott said until he went away to college. But he said when he went away to college that television was sort of frowned upon, that, it was a little bit of snobbery, that, they were supposed to be reading poetry or doing things like that. So that was, he didn't have an opportunity to be watching the show during that time. But clearly after college, when he came back and had the opportunity to get involved in actually writing, that, he was back there with the Waltons. And he said he absolutely loved being on the set. I asked him about, that he came and he was an extra in a number of scenes, particularly in the schoolroom at times. He said that, yes, he loved that. He didn't like school. And so any opportunity that he saw, if there was going to be, the schoolhouse or a picnic or anything where they were going to need extras, that he would ask his dad and want to come and be a part of that, and that he would have to go to school on set. And he couldn't remember. I seem to think that when we had extras, like if we had 10, 12 extra children that were going to be in the schoolroom, that there would be an extra studio teacher. He didn't recall if that was the case, but that's what I seem to remember, that an additional sort of school area would be set up, because our schoolroom was very small, so we couldn't accommodate a lot of extra children. But he said that, yes, he loved that, and that whenever he was there working on the set for the day, or whenever he could come and hang out, that he really studied what was going on and how much he learned. He had a chance to also go and see the other side of it, which I never really got a chance to see. He said he would go and watch Jean and Marjorie Fowler, who did our editing. He'd go and watch them edit, or their daughter, who ended up doing the Foley, which is like a lot of the recreating the sound effects, that he would go and watch her work or get to be a part of that. So, I mean, what a wonderful experience for him to have access to all of that and to learn and watch, and that all of that served him well when he then started writing himself when he was young, and the scripts and the things that his father would share with him, and that his father taught him to read. And he read his father's books when he was young, the books that his father had written before the Waltons. But his father also was doing a lot of writing and Earl started writing like radio dramas, radio plays and things like that. And he said that was radio shows were a different format, like in terms of script, how they were written, how they were formatted. And he said Scott said when he started working on the daytime shows, that those were done in that format. So he was very familiar with it because of having seen these scripts of his father's and that had been shared with him. So he was very comfortable with that format. And then I guess over the course of the years that Scott wrote for daytime, that they transitioned over to more traditional formatting, like what is done with television scripts and things like that. So these were all aspects of what he was able to learn from his time with his father and around the set and the studio. And he said just the guidance of the incredible team of writers on the Waltons, how much he learned from them and how helpful they were, and what a great group it was, and how fortunate he knows he was to have that environment in which to come up and sort of get his feet wet, and then created good relationships. And he said, yeah, nepotism might get your foot in the door, but you won't stay if you can't do the work, if you can't deliver the work, that you won't continue to get work. And so clearly, Scott's skill was of a quality that people wanted to work with him again. So he said that often he was fortunate enough that some producers, writer producers or teams that he worked with, somebody was going on to another show and wanted Scott as part of their writing team going forward. So he then had an opportunity to write for other shows and shows that his father wasn't connected with, where he had an opportunity to prove himself as a writer just in his own right. So all of this, was sort of how it developed for him along the years. Thank you for joining me for this segment of Behind the Scenes of the Waltons. I'll be back with more Behind the Scenes of the Waltons, more Ask Judy, and looking forward to hearing your questions for Scott. Thanks for watching.